you, Senator Kennedy of Louisiana is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, congratulations. I think it's fair to say that you are, and once you're confirmed, will continue to be one of the most powerful people in the world. So I want to begin today. I have some questions, but first, I have a plea. Above all else, above everything else on your plate, I ask that you please preserve the independence of the Federal Reserve. The last thing that America needs right now is to have the Federal Reserve politicized. It's the last thing the world needs right now. And believe me, the whole world is watching, including our enemies. Now, I get it. Our politics is polarized. I hope you'll remain blissfully ignorant of that. And I get it. I'm not telling you not to listen to elected officials, public officials. I get it. I mean, I can only speak for the Senate. We have some very smart people in the Senate. They have strong opinions and strong personalities. We've got a few senators that, to paraphrase Dave Barry, think they ought to make a Hamilton-style musical about their lives. I get all that. But you've got to remain independent. The dollar, and political fads come and go, but the dollar doesn't. I hope not. The dollar underpins the entire world economy. Politicize it at your own risk. Let me shift gears. Question. Professor Keynes, about whom I know you know more than I do, but Professor Keynes has seen a resurgence in the last few decades in his number of followers. And of course, we both know, Professor Keynes said, one way to get out of a recession is to have the government spend money it doesn't have, to deficit spend, to stimulate the economy. But Professor Keynes said something else that the media doesn't usually quote. He also said, when you get out of the recession, pay the damn money back, didn't he? Didn't he say that?
Yeah, I was gonna add that. What he said was it's okay to do deficit spending, but you should be doing surplus, in good times to sort of keep it. Yeah.
Now, behind me is a chart of our public debt going all the way back to, I think, 1990. You don't have to be Euclid to see that the direction is up. And it's been up under Republican administrations, and it's been up under Democratic administrations. It's been up under Democratic and Republican Senates and houses. It's up. So here's my question to you. At what point, how much is too much? At what point in your judgment are we going to hit the point where you have to say, no, that's it. We can't do any more. It's hurting the world. It's hurting our country.
So we don't know when that is. And as the world's reserve currency, demand for our paper is very strong. If you had shown that and then asked somebody 15 years ago to predict what interest rates would be, they wouldn't be predicting that the 10-year would be at 175.
No.
right? So there've been a lot of demand.
But they would have predicted that the debt was going to go up.
They would have looked at that picture and said, well, you must be experiencing difficulty borrowing, but we're not at all. So, no, we're on an unsustainable path. Debt is not at an unsustainable level, but the path is unsustainable, meaning it's growing faster than the economy, meaningfully faster than the economy. We have to address that over time. We will address it over time. And the better way to do it is soon and to do it in good times. Start when the economy is strong and the taxes are rolling in. And that's since we don't do fiscal policy, but I will say that the sustainability of the debt is something we need to get back to and focus on again.
Good luck, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
Senator Van Hollen of Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Chairman. We all recognize we've got continuing economic challenges, but I think it's important to look at some critical areas where we're much better off.
Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the President has requested that Congress appropriate additional money to fight COVID. Senator Van Hollen just referred to it. Do we have that money?
I feel like I'm getting into fiscal policy here. I really want to leave this to
Yes, sir, but do we have that money?
Do we have that money? Well, in the sense of a positive
Do we even have
bank,
5% of that money?
I don't know what you mean by have the money.
Will we have to borrow the money?
I think we're running deficits, so I think a lot of spending is on the basis of borrowing.
Right, okay. Let me ask you about the sanctions on Russia's central bank. The West has sanctioned its bank. And you say it is, or some say that it has basically prevented from Russia from using those foreign reserves because they're foreign reserves. They're not in Russia. They're in other banks in other countries. Has China joined in that sanction?
No, I don't believe so.
So if China wants to, it could support the ruble, could it not?
In theory, yes.
Okay. Now, does that sanction on the foreign reserves of Russia by the West, does that stop dollars and euros from coming into Russia?
I think other sanctions do. They're not getting any hard currency, and I think a lot of payment in dollars into Russia is coming to a grinding halt. Mm-hmm. By the way, I should say we're really not responsible for sanctions, as you obviously know.
You're not responsible for climate change either, but that doesn't stop the Federal Reserve or for elementary and secondary education. But that hasn't stopped the Federal Reserve from having an opinion. Not you, but some of your colleagues. Now, the West has said, the President has said, we're going to throw Russia out of the international community and we're going to throw Russia out of the international marketplace. And obviously we all agree with that. And he sanctioned everything. But he hasn't sanctioned Russia's energy. Europe is going to continue to buy Russian oil and gas, despite the fact that Europe has 1,000 trillion cubic feet of natural gas that it refuses to produce. And America, right now, we're continuing to buy Russian oil. So how are we going to throw Russia out of the international community and global markets if we don't attack their oil?
And that really is a question for the elected government, by the administration and particularly the Treasury Department.
I know, but I'm asking your opinion because you're a smart man.
I appreciate that very much, but my opinion is that it's not something I would have an opinion on as Fed chair. It's just we don't do energy policy, we don't do sanctions. We're technical support. We're not the policymaker. So it would be like the Secretary of the Treasury coming in and talking about monetary policy.
Okay, let me take you back to the spring of 2020. Governments shut down the private sector in virtually every country. Markets are panicking. Everybody's looking at you to calm things down. You did. You did. And one of the things you did, aside from the currency swap line that you established, well played. You said we meaning the Federal Reserve, are going to provide capital to American businesses. Okay? And you did. And you kept us going. And I thank you for that. Suppose, though, the Federal Reserve had said at that time, we're going to keep American businesses going and we're going to supply the capital, except we're going to use this opportunity to bankrupt the oil and gas community, the oil and gas sector. Where would we be today if we'd done that?
You'd be very unhappy with me, and appropriately so.
Why is that?
Well, because
some of your possible new colleagues think we should have done that. Ms. Raskin has talked about that, said we should have taken the opportunity to at that point to bankrupt oil and gas.
So I don't want to get into the.
I just thought I'd slip that in. I'm not asking you to comment on Ms. Raskin, our reserve trust, or the other things that we need to get to the bottom of. I'm asking you to tell me what would have happened if we used that opportunity to bankrupt the fossil fuel industry, as Ms. Raskin suggested we should.
Well,
strike the Raskin part. That makes you nervous, I can tell.
I just, we're a creature of law. You passed the CARES Act. It didn't say anything about picking and choosing, and we weren't going to do that. We didn't do it.
You think picking and choosing is a bad idea?
I think, we actually have a document I have right here from 2009 where it's sort of our document where we negotiated with the Treasury Department who does what, and it talks about the fact that we don't get into allocating credit. We try to affect broad credit conditions. We don't allocate credit to particular industries. And that's a document that we think is sort of one we live with.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman.
Senator Kennedy. Senator Ossoff from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, General, for being here. Could you pull that mic closer to you, please?
I'm sorry. Is that better? Yeah.
Yes, sir. General, I think the Justice Department is losing. I think you're losing on crime. I think you're losing on drugs. I think you're losing on immigration. I think you're losing on Chinese espionage. Let me start with crime. What percentage of cops in America do you think are bad cops?
Very small percentage.
Like how small?
I don't have a number. I think
Well, you're the country's chief, one of the country's chief law enforcement officers. Is it less than 10%?
Yes. Let me just be clear. We believe that most police officers follow the Constitution in their practices. Most police departments do. And all police officers, I believe, want to work in police departments that follow constitutional policing requirements.
Is it less than 5%?
I don't have the numbers. I think it probably is, but I don't have any numbers for you.
Okay. Do you think most cops are racist?
No, I do not.
What percentage of cops do you think, in your judgment, I know you can't give me an exact figure, do you think are racist?
I'm sorry, I'm not resisting because I have a number that I can't give you. I just really, I don't have any way of making that evaluation.
What's your gut tell you? Less than 5%?
One thing I've learned is to not give answers from my gut.
Right. Well, you think it's less than 5%?
I don't know the answer. I'm sorry.
Okay. You don't know?
I don't know, no.
Okay. Why doesn't the Justice Department support stop, question, and frisk?
I'm not sure what you mean stop and frisk? Is that what you mean?
Some call it stop and frisk. Terry v. Ohio.
Yeah, I don't know that the Justice Department has a position. This is a state and local role normally.
You think it works?
I'm sorry?
Do you think stop, question, and frisk works?
I think in some circumstances it can work, but of course it can be abused.
Right.
Yeah.
But why doesn't the Justice Department aggressively encourage law enforcement officials to use that technique? It's been declared constitutional, as you know.
Yeah, the Supreme Court has affirmed the constitutionality of stop and frisk. That's in the Terry case. That's exactly right. But we don't do that. The federal government doesn't do patrolling. This is work for
I
patrolling.
know you don't, but you're one of the country's chief law enforcement officials, maybe the chief, and what you say matters.
Well,
Suppose here's what I'm asking. Let's take Chicago, where we haven't made any inroads in stopping the killing. I mean, Chicago is now the world's largest outdoor shooting range. We know that a lot of the shootings come from gangs. Why wouldn't you want to call the police chief and the mayor in Chicago and say, look, you know who these gang members are. When you have reasonable suspicion under Terry v. Ohio, an objective standard, more than just a hunch, why don't you aggressively stop, question, and frisk these gang members? You'll get guns off the street, you'll get drugs off the street, and you'll get a lot of gang members off the street, and you'll stop people killing each other. Why won't you do that?
the best way for the federal government to stop violent crime is to work at each local level and determine and let the state and locals determine what the best use of their own
Judge,
resources
I'm sorry for interrupting
is.
you, but I'm trying to get some answers.
I'm sorry.
Why won't you do that? Just tell me why you won't do
Because-
that. Your
because-
opinion matters.
Because there is no one solution fits all that the federal government can suggest to state and local law enforcement. We believe state and local law enforcement knows best as to what to do there. We provide
It's not working.
We provide our technical expertise. We put lots of resources into joint task forces. We
Well,
pick
General,
up.
is that, I know, I've got to shut this down. I've only got 15 seconds. Is that why you're asking in the middle of a raging inflation for 7% more money, $2.63 billion to provide technical increase, technical advice? I mean, we're going backwards here on crime, General. You're the state's or the country's chief law enforcement officer, and you won't even answer my question about how you feel about stop, question, and frisk. Why should we give you more money?
It's a resource allocation issue for each local police department. I believe that the Justice Department does the best by putting the money that we're asking for is increase in law enforcement that can be assisting the state and locals.
But General,
in
is
the best
that what
way.
we're supposed to tell the mothers of those kids getting killed in Chicago? You don't understand. It's a resource allocation issue.
No, what you're supposed to tell the mothers in Chicago, and what I told them when I was there, was the Justice Department was there to provide all the resources that this subcommittee will give us to stop violent crime.
But yet
the
you
more
won't,
resources
won't
you
try
can give
to
us.
stop, question, and frisk.
That is a question for the state and the local, for the state and the local law enforcement.
I didn't go over as much as Manchin did, Madam Chairman.
That's not the standard by which we judge behavior.
Thank you, General.
You're welcome.
Now, Senator Van Hollen.
I'm sorry I was late. I was in another committee. Welcome, Madam Secretary.
Thank you.
I've still got a lot of work to do on your proposed budget, but I just wanted to offer a few top-line comments. After 15 months, I think any fair-minded person who's paid attention would have a general idea of the principles of the Biden administration. And it seems to me that the Biden administration believes in bigger government. It believes in higher taxes. It believes in more regulation. It believes in more debt. Based on the president's proposed budget, it believes in a weaker military, not by its words, but by its actions. I think it believes in higher energy prices. I think that the Biden administration hates fossil fuels, on which, at the moment, the greatest economy in all of human history depends. I think the Biden administration thinks that's a mistake. And I think the Biden administration thinks that higher energy prices will somehow wean the American people off of fossil fuels. The attitude seems to be, not in words, but in deed, that we can see the future better than the American people because we're experts, and the American people just need to take their medicine with these higher energy prices, and in the long run, they'll be better off because we'll use them to get rid of fossil fuels. Now, let me talk about your budget. It's not going to pass in its current form. I think you know that. I support wind and power, but I'm an all of the above energy type guy. I think eventually we should, and I don't mean sometime in the next century, we should realistically ask ourselves, when are wind and power going to be able to stand on their own feet without subsidies? I also believe in nuclear power. I can tell from your budget that at least some of your woke colleagues at the department don't. I also believe in hydroelectric power. I believe in hydrogen. I said it, but I'm going to say it again. I believe in nuclear. And I think you should ignore the woke voices. I think it's clean energy, and the new technology with these small modular nuclear reactors has great potential. You shortchanged them in your proposed budget. That tells me a lot. But I also believe in fossil fuels. And I think it's wholly unrealistic, certainly now, certainly for the foreseeable future, and maybe forever, to think that this world can run without fossil fuels. I'm very disappointed in your budget at its lack of emphasis on geoengineering. I know your woke colleagues don't like geoengineering because they think it takes our eye off the ball of climate change. But I think that's a mistake. I think climate change is real. But I think it will be solved or lessened by American ingenuity. It won't be done by the federal government. I'm also disappointed in the fact that the department, and this is why I say it's clear to me the Biden administration believes in a weaker military. Your decision not to fund one of the major weapons that the United States has at a time when our security is clearly threatened. Now, I've given you a mouthful. It is good to see you, Madam Chair. I am sorry I'm late. Please don't construe it as a sign of disrespect. I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Great. Thank you. Let me focus on a couple of things I think we can agree on. One is the importance of nuclear power and how it is an essential part of our clean baseload power, and we ought to be keeping the existing fleet afloat, and we just issued $6 billion in civilian nuclear credits to be able to do that. and to hopefully have as many of them stay operating as possible. But we've also got a $2.5 billion commitment in advanced nuclear reactors as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law column of our budget. That's number one. So we agree on that, and we want to continue funding the advanced nuclear reactors. Number two, we agree on hydroelectric power, and we want to see more dams, and we want to make sure that we are taking advantage of a form of energy that is clean, dispatchable, baseload power. I would also throw geothermal in there in that same sort of category. With respect to wind and solar, your question about when they become essentially reliable baseload power is all contingent upon making sure that technology of batteries becomes cheaper. We have a goal, Earthshot, of getting down the price of long-duration storage by 90%. And when we get down the price of long-duration storage, essentially wind and power become clean, dispatchable baseload power. Here's where we don't agree. This administration believes in the importance of decarbonizing the fossil fuel industry. We know that we've gotten here for the past 120 years based upon fossil fuels. We acknowledge that. And we also know that technology for the next 100 years can power us going forward. Decarbonizing is really important. So we agree on hydrogen, for example, and that bipartisan infrastructure law invests $9 billion in hydrogen hubs. And I think one of them that's going to vie for it is in your region. Mm-hmm. But we make sure that we can decarbonize natural gas, for example, and couple it with carbon capture and sequestration. We're also big believers in the technology associated with direct air capture and other carbon dioxide removal strategies. That's another $3.5 billion in the budget.
Do you mind if I stop you and ask you a question about LNG? I saw the president's statement. I want you to correct me if I'm wrong. President, about a month ago, maybe a few weeks ago, time runs together, said, I want to expand LNG exports. But then I looked at the fine print of his statement. He said, but I want the plants that produce the LNG to be powered only with clean energy. And then he said, but I am not going to change the regulatory environment for oil and gas. And shortly after that, he came out with new proposed rules for NEPA that will make it impossible to build a pipeline. Don't you think that's misleading?
I'm not sure exactly what statement you're referring to, but he did go to Europe and said that we will provide another 15 billion cubic meters per year. We will increase our partnership with them. So as a result, the Department of Energy has permitted 4 additional LNG terminals, allowing their volumes to go to non-free trade agreement countries in a way to fulfill that. The Department of Energy and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission have both permitted another 30 billion cubic feet of export.
But don't you realize the impact that the proposed changes in NEPA are going to have on the oil and gas industry?
The proposed changes in NEPA are to make sure I am not in the EPA. It's not my column.
I know, but it's sure going to impact you.
The intent there is to continue to use technology to clean up fossil fuel emissions like methane. And so making sure that we've got facilities that are not contributing to the problem, but that are using technology, which they are excited to do. I mean, many in the natural gas world really do want to be able to deploy the technology that button down pipelines and make sure that they aren't contributing further to methane leakage.
But we tried to make NEPA a little more palatable, not get rid of it, just say you've got to give us a decision in a couple of years. In the infrastructure bill, which the president is very proud of, and he has talked about it and taken credit for it. That's not a pejorative statement, every chance he's got. But then you turn right around and undo everything that was done in the infrastructure bill with these new proposed rules for NEPA. And I know it's coming from EPA, but Madam Secretary, you're extraordinarily intelligent. I've watched your career for years. You know as well as I do the impact this is going to have on LNG plants, on pipelines, on fossil fuel infrastructure. It's going It's going to slow it down to the pace of an amoeba.
With respect, I fully disagree.
Okay.
I think that you
thought
can
you
have, I think you can accelerate permitting and still respect the environment and not slow down the pace of energy production.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. It's nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too.
I'm going to call you about Mexico.
Okay,
They're confiscating our assets. We need to stop them.
we're on it. I hear you.
Dr. Tabak, what the National Institutes of Health has done is, and continues to do is nothing short of extraordinary. I mean, it's really breathtaking, and I want to thank you and your colleagues for doing that. We've all been to pandemic school for the last several years, and I want to use the few minutes I have to explore what we have learned. Dr. Fauci, whether you asked for it or not, you've sort of been the government's face on a response to the pandemic. Looking back, and I recognize that hindsight is crystal clear, but looking back, do you think it was worth it? Do you think the benefits were greater than the costs of closing down our elementary and secondary schools?
I think that's very difficult to give a definitive answer to that. I know in the very beginning, when we had really no other protection prior to vaccinations that were available to contain somewhat the spread of the virus, one of the things that was felt to be important would be to protect children as well as the rest of the population. Right now, we have felt more than just recently that it's very important to keep the children in school for the simple reason that we know of the deleterious effects, both psychologically, mentally, and developmentally in children, to keep them out of school. But you have to have a delicate balance between protecting the children from getting infected and perhaps bringing
Did we strike the proper balance?
You know, I believe that we have. It's very tough to tell. I think only time will tell whether that's the case, because there is indication that has been deleterious effects on children. But we believe from a public health standpoint that at the time it was the right decision.
Well, can I ask you this, Doctor? And I realize I'm not saying or offering a judgment on what was done at the time. I'm asking what we've learned. Let's suppose we had a substantial increase in prevalence of the coronavirus next week, God forbid.
Right.
Would CDC recommend shutting down the elementary and secondary schools?
It's very difficult for me to speak for the CDC, but knowing the fact that
You recommend it?
right now, I would do everything we can to keep the children in school and not shut down the school. And that has always been my strong recommendation, to the extent possible, not to keep the children out of school,
But yet we
but
did
to
shut
keep
down.
them but to keep them safely in school by getting children that are available to be vaccinated, to get the children who are eligible to be boosted, vaccinated, and to surround the children with teachers and personnel in the school who are vaccinated. That is the best way to protect the children while keeping them in school.
Okay. Let me ask you this. In hindsight, knowing what you know now, had you known it then, did we do the right thing in shutting down society? Would we have been better off saying, no, we're going to protect the vulnerable, the elderly, the people who are immunocompromised, and we're going to isolate them, but have the rest of American society, churches, businesses, universities, schools, go on about their business, while at the same time providing them guidance about how to protect themselves?
Well, It's a complicated question. I'll try and give as simple an answer as possible. I think there's a misperception about who the vulnerable are. There are many, many more vulnerables in society, and there's a misperception that the only
yes, sir,
vulnerables...
but I'm about to run out of time. Let's assume that we can agree on a definition.
I don't think you can. I think that society is very heterogeneous, and it isn't a question of shutting down completely, Senator, because we never shut down completely. If you do shut down a society, you do it for a purpose. And the purpose is at that period of time when you're protecting people from interaction, that you get as many people vaccinated as you possibly can.
Let me stop
to
you,
shut
Doctor.
down.
I'm going to run out of time. Let me ask you one last
Sure.
question. What would you do differently today?
Right now, I would hope that we would get many more people vaccinated.
No, but what would you do when you did it, in hindsight, if you knew then what you know today?
It depends on when we got the vaccine. Do you mean before the availability of vaccine? Before the ability of vaccine, when we had no other situation, I would try to protect people by making sure that they masked and they kept themselves separated from this congregate indoor settings. That's what I would do in the absence of a vaccine. But right now, I think it's important looking forward. We still only have 66% of the total population vaccinated, and less than half of those are boosted. I think we can approach what we are likely going to be seeing now with an increase in surges, with the possibility of a surge in the fall and winter. One of the real things we can all do as a nation is pull together and try to get our people vaccinated, and those who are eligible to be boosted. That would solve a lot of the problems that you're referring to.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
all.
Thank you. Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome, Dr. Tabak. I am posing the first question to you for an update on...
Is it true that Michael Sussman, a partner at Perkins Coie, counsel to the Hillary Clinton campaign, and the source of this information about the allegations regarding the Trump campaign, is it true that he had a badge that gave, an FBI headquarters badge that gave him special privileges in entering the FBI building?
Well, Senator, what I would say to you is much in keeping with the gracious comments you made at the beginning about my commitment to trying to make sure I do this job the right way. That includes making sure that with a case that is currently in the middle of trial and an investigation being run by Mr. Durham that we are actively helping him with. I don't think I can really get into a discussion of those topics at the moment.
When the FBI opened a file to investigate Mr. Sussman's allegations, is it true that the FBI concealed Mr. Sussman's identity?
Again, I completely understand your interest in the question, and I respect it, and I just hope you will respect the fact that because I've got agents working with Mr. Durham on the case and they're in the middle of trial right now, I just don't think I can get into a discussion of that here.
When the FBI opened its file to investigate the allegations that Mr. Sussman, on behalf of the Clinton campaign, made, now known to be untrue, about these back-channel communications between the Trump campaign and Russia. When the FBI opened the file, is it true that the file said the source of this information was not Mr. Sussman, but the Department of Justice?
Again, the same response. These are the very kinds of questions that are being litigated in front of the jury and Judge Cooper right now.
Senator Kennedy, I would just urge you to follow a separate line of questioning. As Director Reyes said, he's not going to answer questions relative to this case that's being litigated.
I appreciate that, Madam Chair, and you know how much I respect you. I want my time back, by the way.
You can have those 3 seconds that I
No,
took.
you talked for about 10 seconds.
I'm happy to give you those 10 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate your help with my questions, but I can handle it myself. Chris, at some point, you're going to have to address this. And I understand you don't want to address it in the middle of, a prosecution. But there are millions of Americans that look at this and think, I'm not saying they're correct, that the FBI has become a political organization. And at some point, you're going to have to address that. The institution is just too important. And some of my colleagues may not want to talk about this, but we're going to have to talk about it at some point.
Well, so first off, I totally appreciate your concern about our institution, and I will tell you that what I can speak to now is that I have implemented all sorts of reforms that I've spoken about quite publicly, over 40-plus corrective measures that deal with a lot of the same issues that are at the heart of the underlying investigation. I completely turned over the entire leadership team in the FBI. We've taken disciplinary action where we could, but we've also been in close cooperation and coordination with Mr. Durham, who is the special counsel, and I think that's the best thing I can do to help address the concerns you're talking about. As to the FBI's reputation, I will tell you, having been to all 56 of our field offices, now almost all of them twice, having been to New Orleans just earlier this month and Baton Rouge just shortly before that, what I find in talking to Americans out in the field, law enforcement partners, business leaders, community leaders, victims, prosecutors, families, is a widespread, even resounding appreciation and respect for the men and women of the FBI. And you will be, I hope, relieved to know that in Louisiana, over the last 3 years, last two and a half years, the number of people in Louisiana applying to be special agents of the FBI has doubled what it was in the first few years when I took over. And so I think that speaks very well of the good citizens of Louisiana and their appreciation and view of the FBI's credibility.
And I thank you for coming, Chris, and I thank you for all the hard work you've done. But I'm going to stand by my Mr. Chairman, inflation is just an imbalance of supply and demand. Can we agree on that?
Yes, generally.
And to put a little finer point on it, our inflation at this time, and this is the case with respect to most cases of inflation, demand is greater than supply, so prices go up.
In some parts of the economy, yes.
Right. Now, you're trying to lower, so we've got a situation where demand's up here, supply's down here. You're trying to lower demand. Is that correct?
Yes, while also giving the supply side time to recover. There's some ground to be covered on that side.
Yes, but you've talked about your role, scope, and mission, and your job is monetary. You're trying to lower demand.
Well, I'm trying to I would say lower demand growth. We don't know that the demand has to actually go down, which would be a recession.
Well, 70% of our economy is driven by consumer demand. And you're trying to lower demand and slow the economy down. Am I correct?
I guess I just say we're slowing down growth.
Right. That's what the economy is, the growth.
Yeah,
okay?
Exactly.
All right. There's another way. The two aren't exclusive. You alluded to that. You can also lower demand, but you can increase supply. Can you not?
Yes.
And that would solve inflation.
Yes, it would.
Now, Congress's job is not to deal with demand per se. A lot of the bills we pass impact demand, but that's the Fed's job.
Right.
Okay? Now, I'm not going to ask you to comment on any specific bill, but tell me the things that Congress could do right now while you're lowering demand, not you literally, the Federal Reserve, what we can do right now to increase supply.
I think the things that you can do are important over the medium and longer term, but probably not so much in the short term. But it's things that like investing in people so that they can remain in the labor market, longer, things like that, and infrastructure, things that will increase the productive capacity.
Well, how
of the
about,
economy.
in the long run, as Keynes said, we're all dead. I'm interested right now in the short run. What about if we reduce the regulatory burden, let's say on refineries, wouldn't that incent refineries to start refining more and help on the supply side?
I would say anything that could increase capacity on that front could have a...
Yeah, but would that help? I'm not trying to get you to endorse legislation. Look, Mr. Chairman, we got a hell of a mess here. Okay? Inflation is hitting my people so hard they're coughing up bones. I don't care what the inflation is in other parts of the country, of the world. I'm sorry they're having inflation in other parts of the world, but them in misery doesn't make my people feel better. They're still miserable. Inflation is hitting people so hard, they're coughing up bones. It's the highest in 40 years. Our national debt is greater than our national output. Crime's up, the border's open, respect for institutions is way down, and 70% of the American people think we're headed in the wrong direction. Now, we got a hell of a mess. And right now, you're the most powerful man in the United States, maybe in the world. We've got to get, President Biden, I don't blame him. I understand politics. He keeps saying, well, your 401k has crashed and gas has gone from $2 to $5 a gallon because the economy's so good. And the American people know that's not true. Now, other than relieving regulatory burden, let me put it in the form of a question. What if the United States Congress said, look, we've got a budget. We're going to freeze spending. We're going to stop injecting more money into the economy. We're going to freeze spending until Powell can get control on the demand side. Would that help?
I feel like giving you advice on what to do when
I'm asking
we're not
for it.
getting
I welcome it.
We're not getting our own job done. I feel like maybe a better thing to do would be for us to get our house in order and do the job you've assigned us.
Well, let me put it another way. Let's suppose, forget about Congress. Let's suppose that every governor in every state and every legislature in every state got together tomorrow and said, I know it's not likely to happen, and said, we are going to freeze our budgets. We're not going to spend a penny more than's already budgeted. Would that help?
Would it help?
Sir?
Would it help with?
Would it help reduce inflation?
It would depend on it. Might, but it would take. Again, I'm giving you. I'm scoring fiscal policy.
Well, I understand
really
you're being careful, but Mr. Chairman, the United States Congress, in addition to its regular budget, has spent $7 trillion. I'm not saying all of it was unnecessary. On top of that, the Fed's increased its balance sheet from $1.5 trillion to $9 trillion. $9 trillion. I know you're cutting it back, but we've injected all of this money into the economy, and then people go, well, we have inflation. Duh. Give me some help here. Tell me what we can do.
I'm really focused on what we can do, which is shrink our balance sheet and raise interest rates and get supply and demand back into alignment and get inflation back down to 2%.
Thank you, Senator Kennedy. Senator
Thank
Tess.
you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for being here today. I want to also thank you for you and your colleagues' good work on implementing the Holding Foreign Companies Accountable Act. Can you give us a quick overview about where we are? China, I understand, has come to the negotiating table, and you've negotiated a statement of protocol. Could you give us an update on the status of your good efforts?
Yes, and again, I want to thank you because Senator Van Hollen just came in and you shepherded that through. And I think that the Holding Foreign Companies Accountable Act gave us the additional leverage to work with Chair Williams down at the PCOB, and we had numerous meetings with the Chinese. We said to the Chinese last August, a year plus ago, that we wouldn't be willing to send the inspectors over to China to look at the audit work papers and the like, unless we could get a very detailed, prescriptive statement of protocol to effectuate the will of Congress. And at its core, it's that how can you trust the numbers in these Chinese companies unless there's somebody in the U.S. who's auditing the auditor, so to speak, technically inspecting and investigating.
Mm-hmm.
They did sign that. We thought it was important to get that signed. The PCOB is sending inspectors over. I think they're on flights tomorrow because I think it starts Monday the 19th. And it takes about 8 to 10 weeks to get through. So we'll probably know somewhere around Thanksgiving or early December. And I don't know if the Chinese are going to comply. They've told me. I mean, the Ministry of Finance have told me directly on WebEx calls, and the China Securities Regulatory Commission has said they will comply, and it's pretty clear. No redactions in the work papers. Take testimony from whomever the PCOB needs to take testimony from. They can onward share the information to us, and they can pick whichever companies they want to look at.
I'm not sure they'll comply either, but they move further toward compliance than at any point in the past. Senator Van Hollen and I have a bill that's passed the Senate, as you know, being considered by the House to move the deadline from 3 years to 2 years, with respect to which, if they don't comply, we tell them to leave our exchanges, and I think that might help if we can get that passed, and I appreciate your good efforts there. In my last 2 minutes, I wanted to shift gears on the climate risk disclosure, and I don't mean to be critical. I'm trying to understand, because I thought Senator Tester raised some very good questions. What's your best guess of the cost of compliance with your climate risk disclosure rules?
So, one, I do support your accelerating Holding Foreign Companies Accountable Act to 2 years versus 3, because I think it will continue to have the right leverage, even if the Chinese authorities, the Chinese regulators allow for compliance this year. What about next year? What about next year? So I do support that.
Thank you.
In terms of the climate role, we lay out in this proposal all the economic analysis, and I don't mean to speak for the numbers in that, but by company.
What's your best guess, if you could? I'm sorry to interrupt you, Gary, but I've only got a minute left. What's your best guess of the cost of it to comply?
So per company, we lay that out, and depending on the size, and I just don't want to misspeak, it's from a couple $100,000 to, I apologize, $1 billion. And the total cost, I think Senator Toomey accurately quoted it. You weren't maybe in the room. It's measured in the single-digit billions across the entire economy. Okay. But what we benefit from is also people are coming in and giving us critical analysis of whether we're accurate.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm going to run out of time. Here's my question. It'll cost billions of dollars to comply. Those are scarce resources to the extent that people like Senator Tester have to spend the money to comply. They can't spend the money on something else. Presumably, the purpose of the rule is to focus investors' attention on the risk of climate change so that they will demand that companies do a better job. The purpose of which is to lower the world's temperatures. Am I okay?
No, actually, but that's not the purpose. The purpose, I mean, I can speak for the 5-member commission, but also for myself. We're not a merit regulator. So the purpose actually is not to do what you said. It's just for investors to get the information.
I think the people supporting the rule, that's their intention.
That's not why I support it.
Okay, fair enough. But I think that's what most people expect. You put pressure on the companies to disclose, shareholders put pressure, people do better job. But I'd like to see, while you're asking Senator Tester and the other people to estimate, I would like to see some sort of estimate of how much all this money spent on compliance is going to lower world temperatures. I mean, we're spending, I believe in clean air and bright water. I want to be able to eat and live indoors. But what bothers me is while we're spending these trillions of dollars of scarce resources, India and China gets 60% of its energy from coal. China has 3,500 coal-fueled power plants. We've got less than 100. We don't have any kind of agreement with India or China for them to reduce emissions. So we spend all of this money and world temperatures are not reduced. And you give me your
Chair Gensler, answer the question briefly. Thank you.
The good news is that's not what our authorities are and or what motivates this one commissioner. It's about actually helping investors get more consistent information, even if they want to invest in what might be brown assets rather than green assets. They will get more consistent information and will probably lower some of the greenwashing that's out there and other things like that.
Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator